The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the empty streets as Simone Washington ran for her life. Her bright blue dress was torn at the sleeve, her breath came in sharp gasps, and her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Behind her, 3 men chased with determined steps, their voices calling out threats that made her blood run cold. She had been walking home from her evening shift at the downtown library when they grabbed her from behind, but she managed to break free and run. Now, with nowhere to hide and no one to help, she realized these men wanted her for reasons she could not understand. Her phone was dead, the streets were empty, and every shadow seemed to hide another danger. As she turned the corner onto 5th Street, she stumbled and nearly fell, hearing their footsteps getting closer with each passing second. Simone's legs burned as she pushed herself harder down the dark street. The bright blue dress she wore to work that morning now felt like a beacon in the darkness, making her an easy target for the men who pursued her. She could hear them shouting to each other, coordinating their movements like hunters tracking prey. This way she went down 5th Street, one of them called out. "Don't let her get away. The boss wants her tonight," another responded. Simone had no idea who their boss was or why anyone would want to kidnap her. She was just a 25-year-old librarian who lived quietly with her grandmother and spent her days helping people find books. She had never hurt anyone, never been involved in anything dangerous, and certainly never done anything that would make someone want to harm her. As she rounded another corner, she saw the bright headlights of a car approaching. Without thinking, she ran directly into the street, waving her arms desperately. The luxury sedan came to a sudden stop, and she could see a man behind the wheel looking concerned. Nicholas Thompson had been driving home from a late business meeting when he saw the young woman in the bright blue dress running into his path. Even in the darkness, he could see the fear in her eyes and the way she kept looking over her shoulder. Something was very wrong. He rolled down his window. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" "Please," Simone gasped, running to the passenger side of his car. "There are men chasing me. I don't know what they want, but they're trying to take me somewhere." Nicholas didn't hesitate. He reached across and opened the passenger door. "Get in. Now." Simone climbed into the car just as the 3 men appeared around the corner. When they saw her getting into the vehicle, they stopped and began backing away into the shadows. Nicholas noticed this immediately. "Those men," he said, pointing toward where they had disappeared. "Were they the ones chasing you?" "Yes," Simone said, still breathing heavily. "They grabbed me near the library where I work. I managed to get away, but they kept following me." Nicholas studied her face in the light from his dashboard. She was beautiful, with kind eyes that held intelligence and strength despite her current fear. Her bright blue dress was elegant but simple, the kind a professional woman might wear to work. Everything about her suggested she was exactly what she appeared to be, an innocent person who had been targeted for reasons unknown. "My name is Nicholas Thompson," he said, extending his hand to her. "And I'm going to make sure you're safe." "Simone Washington," she replied, shaking his hand gratefully. "Thank you so much for stopping. I don't know what I thought would happen." Nicholas put the car in drive and began moving away from the area where the men had been. "Do you have any idea why someone would want to kidnap you? Any enemies? Any recent problems with anyone?" Simone shook her head. "None. I work at the downtown library, I live with my grandmother, and I spend my free time reading or volunteering at the community center. I can't think of anyone who would want to hurt me." "What about money? Do you have anything valuable that someone might want?" "I make minimum wage at the library," Simone said with a slight laugh that held no humor. "I drive a 15-year-old car and live in a small apartment. There's nothing about my life that would interest criminals." Nicholas glanced at her again as they drove through the city streets. He had built his fortune by reading people accurately, and everything about Simone Washington told him she was telling the truth. She was an innocent victim of something larger than herself. "I'm taking you somewhere safe," he said. "My penthouse has security, and we can figure out what's happening from there." "I can't impose on you like that," Simone protested. "You've already done so much by helping me get away from those men. I should probably just go home." "Absolutely not," Nicholas said firmly. "If those men were organized enough to coordinate a kidnapping attempt, they probably know where you live. Going home would put you right back in danger." Simone considered this and realized he was right. The men had seemed to know exactly where to find her when she left the library. They might very well know her address and be waiting for her there. "Okay," she said quietly. "But just for tonight. I'll find somewhere else to go tomorrow." Nicholas smiled at her concern for imposing on him. In his world of business dealings and social climbing, he rarely met people who worried about being a burden to others. Most people he knew would take advantage of any offer of help without a second thought. We'll figure out a longer-term solution once we understand what we're dealing with, he said. Right now the important thing is making sure you're safe. As they pulled into the underground garage of his downtown building, Simone looked around at the expensive cars and modern architecture. This was clearly a world very different from her own, but Nicholas had offered his help without hesitation when she needed it most. "Thank you," she said as they got out of the car. "I know you don't know me, but you probably saved my life tonight." Nicholas looked at her seriously. "Anyone in my position should have done the same thing. But I'm glad I was there when you needed help." As they rode the elevator to the top floor, Simone wondered what kind of man Nicholas Thompson really was, and whether she could trust him with her safety. Everything about this situation was beyond her experience, but something told her that this well-dressed stranger in the red shirt and dark suit might be exactly the person she needed in her life right now. The elevator doors opened to reveal a penthouse that took Simone's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city lights spread out below, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a magazine. Everything was elegant but comfortable, clearly the home of someone with both money and good taste. "Welcome to my home," Nicholas said, gesturing for her to enter. "Please, make yourself comfortable." Simone stepped into the living room, her bright blue dress a vivid contrast against the neutral colors of the expensive furniture. She had never been in a place like this before, and she felt somewhat out of place despite Nicholas's welcoming manner. "Can I get you something to drink? Water, tea, something stronger?" Nicholas asked, moving toward what she assumed was the kitchen. "Water would be wonderful," Simone said, settling carefully onto the edge of a cream-colored sofa. "And thank you again for helping me. I still can't believe what happened tonight." Nicholas returned with a glass of water and sat in a chair across from her. He had loosened his tie and rolled up the sleeves of his red shirt, looking more relaxed but still maintaining an air of quiet authority. "Tell me more about your routine," he said. "When do you usually leave work? What route do you take home? Who knows your schedule?" Simone sipped her water and thought about his questions. "I work at the downtown library Tuesday through Saturday. I usually leave around 8 in the evening when we close. I take the same route home every night because it's the safest and most well-lit path to the bus stop." "So someone could have been watching you, learning your patterns?" Nicholas observed. "But why?" Simone asked, her voice rising with frustration. "I'm nobody special. I don't have money, I don't have connections, I don't have anything that would make me worth kidnapping." Nicholas stood up and walked to the windows looking out at the city. "In my experience, when something like this happens, it's usually about money in some way. Either someone thinks you have something valuable, or someone wants to use you to get to something valuable. The only valuable thing in my family is my grandmother's house," Simone said. "But that's just a small place in an old neighborhood. It's not worth much. Sometimes properties are worth more than people realize," Nicholas said thoughtfully. "Development potential, location value, mineral rights. Have you had any real estate agents or developers contact you recently?" Simone shook her head. "No one like that. Just the usual junk mail about buying houses for cash." Nicholas pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call my security chief. Frank Rodriguez has been with me for 5 years and he used to be a police detective. He can help us figure out what's going on." "You have a security chief?" Simone asked, realizing again how different their worlds were. "When you have money, you attract attention from people who want to take it," Nicholas explained. "Frank helps me avoid problems before they start." While Nicholas made his phone call, Simone looked around the penthouse more carefully. There were bookshelves lined with what appeared to be first editions, artwork that looked original and expensive, and photographs showing Nicholas at various charity events and business functions. This was clearly a man who had achieved considerable success, but he seemed to use his wealth responsibly. "Frank will be here in 20 minutes, Nicholas said, ending his call. "In the meantime, why don't you tell me more about yourself? What made you want to work at a library?" Simone smiled for the first time since the chase began. "I've always loved books and helping people find information they need. My grandmother raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, and she taught me that education and knowledge are the most valuable things you can possess." "She sounds like a wise woman," Nicholas said, sitting back down across from her. "She is. She worked 2 jobs to put me through college and she never complained about the sacrifices she made. Everything I am is because of her support and love." Nicholas nodded appreciatively. "Family like that is precious. What would she think about what happened to you tonight?" "She would be terrified," Simone admitted. "She worries about me living in the city, and something like this would confirm all her fears." We'll make sure she doesn't have to worry, Nicholas said with quiet confidence. Whatever this is about, we'll solve it. Before Simone could respond, there was a knock at the door. Nicholas got up to answer it, and Simone heard him greeting someone in Spanish before switching to English. Frank, thank you for coming so quickly. This is Simone Washington, the woman I told you about. Frank Rodriguez was a stocky man with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He shook Simone's hand with a firm grip and a reassuring smile. Miss Washington, I'm sorry this happened to you. Can you describe the men who chased you? Simone gave Frank a detailed description of the three men, including their height, clothing, and the few words she had heard them speak. Frank took notes and asked follow-up questions that showed his police background. I'll start by checking with my contacts in the department to see if there have been similar incidents recently, Frank said. I'll also look into any recent activity around your workplace and neighborhood. Is there anything I can do to help? Simone asked. Right now, the best thing you can do is stay safe, Frank replied. Mr. Thompson's building has excellent security, and you'll be protected here while we investigate. After Frank left to begin his investigation, Nicholas showed Simone to a guest bedroom that was larger and more comfortable than her entire apartment. The bed was covered with soft linens, and there was an adjoining bathroom stocked with everything she might need. I keep spare clothes in the closet for guests, Nicholas said. You should find something that fits you for tomorrow. Simone looked through the closet and found several dresses and casual outfits in various sizes. She selected a bright green dress that looked like it would fit her well. This is too much, she said, holding up the dress. You're being incredibly generous to someone you just met. Helping others is not about knowing them for a long time, Nicholas replied. It's about recognizing when someone needs assistance and having the ability to provide it. As Simone prepared for bed in the luxurious guest room, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. This morning she had been a quiet librarian with a simple routine, and now she was staying in a millionaire's penthouse under the protection of his security team. What drives someone to help a complete stranger without hesitation? If you're inspired by acts of unexpected kindness like Nicholas's, subscribe to see how this story develops and share your thoughts about whether you would have done the same thing in his position. She had always believed that good people existed in the world, but she had never expected to encounter someone who would go to such lengths for her safety. As she drifted off to sleep in the comfortable bed, she wondered what the investigation would reveal and whether her life would ever return to normal. More importantly, she wondered about the man who had rescued her. Nicholas Thompson was clearly successful and powerful, but he had shown her kindness and concern that seemed genuine rather than calculated. In a world where many people were focused only on their own interests, his willingness to help felt almost too good to be true. But as sleep finally came, Simone felt safer than she had since the moment those men first grabbed her outside the library. Simone woke up to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of fresh coffee drifting from somewhere in the penthouse. For a moment she forgot where she was, but then the events of the previous night came flooding back. The chase, the rescue, and the safety of Nicholas Thompson's home. She showered and put on the bright green dress she had selected from the guest closet. It fit perfectly and was made from fabric that felt expensive against her skin. When she looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, she almost didn't recognize the elegant woman looking back at her. Following the smell of coffee, she found Nicholas in the kitchen, wearing casual jeans and a blue shirt that brought out his eyes. He was reading something on his tablet while eating breakfast, but he looked up with a warm smile when she entered. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well. I wasn't sure what you liked for breakfast, so I made a little of everything." Simone looked at the kitchen island, which was covered with fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, bacon, and what appeared to be homemade pancakes. There was enough food for 6 people. "This is incredible," she said, still taking in the spread. "But you didn't need to go to all this trouble for me." "It wasn't any trouble," Nicholas replied, pouring her a cup of coffee. "I enjoy cooking when I have the time, and it gave me something to do while Frank worked on the investigation." Simone accepted the coffee gratefully and sat down at the counter. "Have you heard anything from him yet?" "He called an hour ago. He's found some interesting information, but he wants to do more research before sharing what he's discovered. He'll be here around noon to give us a full update." Nicholas served her a plate with a little bit of everything he had prepared, and Simone was surprised by how good it all tasted. She had expected that someone with his wealth would have staff to handle cooking and other domestic tasks. "You're a very good cook," she said, cutting into the pancakes. "Did you learn from your family?" "My mother taught me when I was young," Nicholas said with a slight smile. "She believed that everyone should know how to take care of themselves regardless of their circumstances. It's one of the most valuable lessons she gave me. She sounds like a smart woman. She was. She passed away 5 years ago, but I think about her advice almost every day. Simone heard the sadness in his voice and felt a connection with him. I'm sorry for your loss. I lost my parents when I was young, so I understand how much it means to have that guidance and love. Your grandmother raised you, you mentioned last night. Yes, and she did an amazing job. She taught me to value education, kindness, and helping others. She always said that the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they do with what they've been given. Nicholas nodded thoughtfully. That's very similar to what my mother used to say. She believed that privilege comes with responsibility. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Simone found herself studying Nicholas's face. He was handsome in a way that seemed natural rather than practiced, and there was something genuine about his expressions that made her trust him. But more than his appearance, she was impressed by his character. He had taken in a complete stranger without hesitation and was treating her like an honored guest rather than a burden. Can I ask you something? Simone said as they finished breakfast. Of course. Why are you doing all this for me? Most people would have called the police and left it at that, but you've opened your home and hired security to help someone you just met. Nicholas considered her question carefully. I suppose it's because I believe that when you have the ability to help someone, you have the responsibility to do it. I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time last night, and I have the resources to keep you safe while we figure out what's happening. But surely you have other things to worry about. Your business, your own life. My business runs smoothly because I have good people working for me, Nicholas said. And as for my personal life, helping you has become the most important thing I'm doing right now. Simone felt her heart skip a beat at his words. She had dated occasionally over the years, but she had never met a man who seemed so genuinely focused on her well-being. It was both thrilling and slightly overwhelming. After breakfast, Nicholas showed her around the penthouse, including his home office and an impressive library that rivaled the collection at her workplace. The books ranged from classic literature to modern business theory, and many appeared to be signed first editions. This is incredible, Simone said, running her fingers along the spines of the books. You have some titles here that we can't even afford for the public library. Feel free to borrow anything that interests you, Nicholas said. I love books, but I don't read as much as I'd like to these days. What kind of business are you in? Simone asked, realizing she knew very little about how he had acquired his wealth. I started with real estate development, and then expanded into technology investments and renewable energy, Nicholas explained. I try to focus on projects that have positive social impact as well as financial returns. That's impressive. And you built all this yourself? I had help along the way and I was lucky with some early investments. But yes, I started with nothing and built it from there. Simone was impressed by his modesty. She had met wealthy people before through her work at the library, and most of them seemed eager to talk about their success. Nicholas spoke about his achievements as if they were simply facts rather than accomplishments to boast about. Around noon, Frank Rodriguez arrived with a thick folder of papers and a serious expression. He greeted both of them professionally but seemed focused on the information he had gathered. What did you find? Nicholas asked, gesturing for Frank to sit down in the living room. It's more complicated than we initially thought, Frank said, opening his folder. Miss Washington, have you ever heard of Harrison Blake? Simone shook her head. No, that name doesn't sound familiar. He's a developer who specializes in buying properties in older neighborhoods and converting them to luxury housing or commercial space. He's made a fortune doing this, but he's also been accused of using questionable tactics to force people to sell. What kind of questionable tactics? Nicholas asked. Harassment, intimidation, sometimes worse. Nothing that's been proven in court, but there's a pattern of people suddenly agreeing to sell to him after experiencing problems. Simone felt a chill run down her spine. But I don't own any property. I rent an apartment and my grandmother owns her house, but it's nothing special. Frank pulled out a map and spread it on the coffee table. Your grandmother's house is in the center of a 6-block area that Blake has been quietly buying up over the past 2 years. According to the city planning office, there are preliminary discussions about a major development project in that neighborhood. A development project? Simone asked. Mixed-use commercial and residential. Hotels, shopping, office space. The kind of project that could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars if someone controlled enough of the land. Nicholas studied the map carefully. And Mrs. Washington's property is key to making the project work? It appears so. Blake has acquired most of the other properties, but there are a few holdouts including your grandmother's house. Without those properties, the development can't move forward. Simone felt overwhelmed by this information. But why kidnap me? Why not just make an offer to buy the house? Because your grandmother has already refused to sell, Frank said, pulling out another document. Blake's company made an offer 6 months ago, and she turned it down. Since then he's probably been looking for other ways to pressure her. By threatening her granddaughter, Nicholas said grimly. That would be my guess, Frank confirmed. If something happened to you, your grandmother might be more willing to sell and leave the area. Simone stood up and walked to the windows looking out at the city below. The idea that someone would try to hurt her to force her grandmother to sell their family home was horrifying and infuriating at the same time. What can we do about this? She asked, turning back to Nicholas and Frank. Several things, Nicholas said immediately. First, we're going to make sure both you and your grandmother are protected. Frank can arrange security for her house, and you'll stay here until this is resolved. I can't stay here indefinitely, Simone protested. I have a job, a life. Your life won't be worth much if Blake's people succeed in their next attempt, Nicholas said firmly but kindly. Please let me help you with this. I have the resources to keep you both safe and to fight Blake legally. Simone looked at this man who was offering to completely upend his life to help her and her grandmother. It was beyond anything she had ever experienced, and part of her wondered if it was too good to be true. Why would you do all this? She asked again. This isn't your fight. Nicholas walked over to her and looked directly into her eyes. It became my fight the moment those men chased you into my path. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you or your family, not when I have the power to prevent it. The sincerity in his voice and the determination in his eyes convinced Simone that he meant every word. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt like she had a real chance of protecting herself and her grandmother. Okay, she said quietly. I accept your help. But I want to contribute somehow. I don't want to just be someone you're protecting. Nicholas smiled at her determination. I was hoping you'd say that. We're going to need your help to understand Blake's operation and to gather evidence of his illegal activities. Whatever you need me to do, Simone said. As Frank began outlining their strategy for investigating Blake and protecting her grandmother, Simone realized that her life had changed completely in the span of 24 hours. She was no longer just a quiet librarian living a simple life. She was now part of a team fighting against corruption and greed, supported by a man whose kindness and generosity seemed to know no bounds. And as she watched Nicholas listening intently to Frank's plans, already thinking about how to use his resources to help her, she felt something else growing in her heart that she hadn't expected. The beginning of love. The next morning brought a flurry of activity to Nicholas's penthouse. Frank arrived early with 2 additional security specialists, and they set up what looked like a command center in Nicholas's home office. Simone watched from the doorway as they installed extra phone lines, computer equipment, and surveillance monitors. This seems like a lot for one corrupt developer, she said to Nicholas as he joined her in watching the setup. Frank doesn't take chances when it comes to security, Nicholas replied. And Blake has apparently been doing this for years without being caught, which means he's probably more sophisticated than we initially thought. Simone was wearing another outfit from the guest closet, a bright maroon dress that fit her perfectly and made her feel more confident than she had since this ordeal began. Nicholas had insisted on replacing all her personal items that might have been contaminated if Blake's people had been watching her apartment, and he had done so with characteristic generosity and attention to detail. Miss Washington, Frank called from the office. We're ready to start gathering information about your family's property. Can you join us? Simone and Nicholas sat down with Frank and his team around a large table covered with maps, legal documents, and computer printouts. The amount of research they had accomplished in just one day was impressive. We've discovered that Blake's development project is even larger than we initially thought, Frank began. He's not just targeting your grandmother's neighborhood. He's been working on similar projects in 3 other parts of the city. All using the same tactics? Nicholas asked. That's what we're trying to determine, Frank said. We've identified at least 12 families who sold their properties to Blake after experiencing various problems. Break-ins, vandalism, harassment, and in 2 cases family members being followed or threatened. Simone felt sick thinking about other families going through what she was experiencing. Have any of them been willing to talk about what happened? That's where we need your help, Frank said. As a librarian, you probably have experience talking to people and gaining their trust. We think they might be more willing to open up to you than to us. What would I need to do? Simone asked. We've arranged meetings with 3 of the families who sold to Blake recently, Frank explained. You would talk to them about their experiences and see if you can get them to provide details that might help us build a legal case. Nicholas looked concerned. Is that safe? If Blake's people are still monitoring the situation, they might notice Simone talking to these families. We've thought about that, Frank said. The meetings will be in public places with security backup, and we'll vary the locations and times to avoid patterns. I want to do this, Simone said before Nicholas could object. If Blake has been hurting other families, I want to help stop him. Are you sure? Nicholas asked. There's no pressure for you to get involved in the investigation. We can handle this without putting you at risk. I'm already at risk, Simone pointed out. And I'm not the kind of person who sits back and lets others fight battles for me. If I can help these families get justice, I want to try. Nicholas studied her face and seemed to recognize the determination there. Okay, but we do this carefully and with full security support. The first meeting was scheduled for that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. Simone would meet with Maria Santos, a woman whose family had sold their restaurant building to Blake after experiencing a series of suspicious incidents. Remember, Frank briefed Simone before she left. You're not interrogating her. You're just a woman who's going through something similar, looking for information and support. Nicholas drove Simone to the meeting while Frank and his team positioned themselves nearby. The coffee shop was busy with afternoon customers, which provided good cover but also made Simone nervous about having such a conversation in public. Maria Santos was a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and worried expression. She had agreed to meet after Frank's contact in the police department vouched for their investigation. Thank you for meeting with me, Simone said as they sat down at a corner table. I understand that your family went through something similar to what my family is experiencing now. Maria nodded reluctantly. It started small. Little things that could have been coincidences. Our delivery trucks got parking tickets every day for a week. The health inspector showed up 3 times in 1 month, each time finding tiny violations that had never been problems before. That must have been frustrating, Simone said, encouraging her to continue. Then it got worse. Someone spray-painted graffiti on our building twice. The windows got broken one night, and the police said it was probably random vandalism. But my husband and I knew it wasn't random. Did you report your suspicions to anyone? Who would we report them to? Maria asked with a bitter laugh. We had no proof that Blake was behind any of it. And when his representative showed up with an offer to buy our building, he acted like he was doing us a favor by taking the property off our hands after all our bad luck. So you felt like you had no choice but to sell? We have 3 children and we were worried about their safety. When someone left a note on our car saying that accidents happen to families who don't know when to leave, we decided the building wasn't worth risking our kids' lives. Simone felt angry on behalf of this family and all the others who had been forced out of their homes and businesses. Blake's tactics were clearly illegal, but they were also subtle enough to be difficult to prove. Have you ever considered going to the police with all this information? Simone asked. With what evidence? Maria replied. A few parking tickets and some graffiti? Blake's people were too smart to leave any direct connections to him. After the meeting, Simone felt both frustrated and motivated. The pattern of harassment was clear, but proving Blake's involvement would require more concrete evidence than victim testimony alone. How did it go? Nicholas asked as they drove back to his building. It's definitely Blake, Simone said. The tactics are too similar to be coincidental. But proving it in court will be challenging. Frank thinks we might have better luck with the financial investigation, Nicholas said. He's looking into Blake's business dealings to see if there are any irregularities in how he's financing these projects. That evening, Nicholas cooked dinner while Simone reviewed the files Frank had assembled about Blake's various development projects. The scope of his operations was impressive and troubling. He had been systematically targeting older neighborhoods throughout the city, displacing longtime residents and small businesses to make way for luxury developments. This is bigger than just my grandmother's house, Simone said as they sat down to eat. Blake is essentially forcing gentrification by driving out people who can't afford to fight back. Which is probably why he's been getting away with it for so long, Nicholas replied. Most of his victims don't have the resources to challenge him legally. But we do, Simone said, looking at Nicholas with appreciation. You've given us the resources to fight back. We're going to do more than fight back, Nicholas said firmly. We're going to stop him from doing this to anyone else. After dinner, they sat in Nicholas's library while Simone read through more case files and Nicholas made phone calls to various business contacts who might have information about Blake's financing sources. Simone found herself watching him as he worked, admiring his focused determination and the way he approached problems with both intelligence and compassion. "You're staring at me," Nicholas said with a smile, hanging up from his latest call. "I'm sorry," Simone said, embarrassed to be caught. "I was just thinking about how grateful I am for everything you're doing." "You don't need to be grateful," Nicholas said, moving to sit closer to her on the sofa. "I'm not doing this out of charity or obligation. I'm doing it because I care about what happens to you." "You barely know me," Simone said softly. "I know enough," Nicholas replied, looking into her eyes. "I know you're brave enough to run from kidnappers and smart enough to want to help other victims. I know you're loyal to your family and dedicated to your work. I know you're beautiful inside and out." Simone felt her heart racing as Nicholas moved closer to her. She had been attracted to him since the moment he rescued her, but she had tried to convince herself that her feelings were just gratitude for his help. "Nicholas," she began, but he gently placed a finger on her lips. "I know this situation is complicated," he said, "and I know the timing isn't ideal. But I need you to know that my feelings for you have nothing to do with the circumstances that brought us together." Before Simone could respond, Nicholas's phone rang with Frank's ringtone. The moment was broken, but the connection between them remained as Nicholas answered the call. "What did you find?" Nicholas asked, putting the phone on speaker so Simone could hear. "We got lucky," Frank said, his excitement clear in his voice. "One of Blake's former employees contacted us through a mutual friend. He's willing to provide inside information about Blake's operations." "Is he credible?" Nicholas asked. "He worked in Blake's accounting department for 3 years before quitting last month. He says he has documentation of payments to third parties for property acquisition services that can't be traced to legitimate contractors." Simone looked at Nicholas with growing hope. "That could be the evidence we need." "We're meeting with him tomorrow morning," Frank said. "If his information is as good as he claims, we might be able to turn this whole thing around." As they ended the call, Simone realized that her relationship with Nicholas had shifted into something deeper and more complex than either of them had expected. The investigation into Blake was bringing them closer together, but it was also creating a situation where she couldn't be sure if her feelings were genuine or just a response to his protection and support. "This is all moving very fast," she said to Nicholas as they prepared to go to their separate bedrooms. "Yes, it is," Nicholas agreed. "But sometimes the most important things in life happen quickly. The question is whether you're brave enough to trust your instincts." As Simone lay in bed that night, she thought about courage and trust and the unexpected ways that life could change in just a few days. 3 days ago, she had been a woman with a simple life and modest dreams. Now she was part of an investigation into corruption, staying in a millionaire's penthouse, and falling in love with a man who seemed too good to be true. But as she drifted off to sleep, she realized that Nicholas Thompson wasn't too good to be true. He was simply a good man who had chosen to use his resources to help others, and she was lucky enough to be the beneficiary of his kindness and courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new developments in their fight against Blake, but tonight she felt safe and hopeful for the first time since this whole ordeal began. The next morning brought unexpected revelations that would change everything Simone thought she knew about her family's situation. Frank's contact with Blake's former employee had provided more than just financial records. He had uncovered information about the true value of her grandmother's property that no one in the family had suspected. Simone was having breakfast with Nicholas when Frank arrived with a stack of documents and an expression that suggested significant news. "We need to take a drive to see your grandmother," Frank announced without preamble. "The information we got yesterday changes everything about this case." "What kind of information?" Simone asked, immediately concerned. "The kind that explains why Blake is willing to go to such extreme lengths to get her property," Frank replied. "But I think Mrs. Washington should hear this firsthand." Nicholas was already reaching for his car keys. "Is she safe? Do we need to get her out of her house?" "She's safe for now. My security team has been watching her house since yesterday, and there's been no suspicious activity. But we need to talk to her about some documents that she might have inherited along with the property." During the drive to her grandmother's house, Frank explained what his investigation had uncovered. Blake's accounting records showed that he had been paying geological survey companies to test soil and water samples in the targeted neighborhoods, which was unusual for someone interested only in real estate development. "What would he be testing for?" Simone asked. "That's what we need to find out," Frank said. "But whatever it is, it's valuable enough to justify spending millions on property acquisition and harassment campaigns." Simone's grandmother lived in a modest house on a tree-lined street that had been her home for 40 years. Eleanor Washington was a dignified woman in her 70s who had raised Simone with love, wisdom, and unshakable principles. When she opened the door to find Simone with two well-dressed men, her first reaction was maternal concern. "Simone, sweetheart, what's wrong? You look worried and you're wearing clothes I've never seen before." "Grandma, we need to talk," Simone said, hugging the older woman tightly. "These are friends who are helping me with a problem. Can we come in?" Mrs. Washington invited them into her small but immaculate living room, where family photos covered every surface and the smell of fresh-baked cookies filled the air. She served coffee and homemade cookies while studying Nicholas and Frank with the shrewd intelligence that had served her well throughout her life. "Now tell me what's going on," she said, settling into her favorite chair and fixing Simone with a direct look. "And don't try to sugarcoat it. I'm old enough to handle the truth." Simone explained the events of the past few days, including the kidnapping attempt, Blake's harassment campaign, and the investigation into his development projects. Mrs. Washington listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "So this Blake person wants to force me to sell my house," Mrs. Washington said when Simone finished. "And he's willing to hurt you to make that happen." "That's what we believe," Frank confirmed. "But we've discovered that your property might be more valuable than anyone realized. We need to ask you about any documents or records that came with the house when you inherited it." Mrs. Washington looked puzzled. "I inherited this house from my late husband's father 30 years ago. There was a box of old papers in the basement, but I never thought they were important." "Could we look at those papers?" Nicholas asked gently. "They might help us understand why Blake is so interested in this property specifically." Mrs. Washington led them to the basement, where she retrieved a dusty cardboard box from a storage shelf. Inside were various documents dating back to the 1940s, including the original deed to the property, old tax records, and several official-looking papers with government seals. Frank examined the documents carefully, his excitement growing as he read through them. "Mrs. Washington, do you know what mineral rights are?" "Not really, dear." "Is that important?" "These documents suggest that your property includes mineral rights to not just this lot, but to a much larger area underground," Frank explained. "Your husband's grandfather apparently owned a significant tract of land that was later subdivided for residential development, but the mineral rights were never separated from this property." Nicholas looked at the maps and legal descriptions with growing understanding. "So Mrs. Washington doesn't just own the surface of this lot. She owns whatever is underground for several city blocks." "That would explain the geological testing," Frank said. "Blake must have discovered that there's something valuable underground, and he needs to control the mineral rights to extract it." Simone felt overwhelmed by this revelation. What kind of minerals could be that valuable in the middle of the city? "Could be rare earth elements, could be natural gas deposits, could be anything," Frank said. "The important thing is that Blake knows something we don't, and he's been willing to commit crimes to get access to it." Mrs. Washington studied the documents with new interest. "You mean this old house sits on top of something worth a lot of money?" "Potentially millions of dollars," Nicholas said. "Which explains why Blake has been so persistent and why he escalated to threatening Simone. And it explains why your grandmother's property is the key to his whole development project," Frank added. "Without control of these mineral rights, Blake can't access whatever is underground." Simone looked at her grandmother with a mixture of amazement and concern. "Grandma, you could be sitting on a fortune." "Well, that's interesting," Mrs. Washington said with characteristic calm. "But it doesn't change the fact that this is my home and I don't want to sell it to some bully." Nicholas smiled at the older woman's pragmatic response. "Mrs. Washington, with your permission, I'd like to hire some experts to determine exactly what those mineral rights include and what they might be worth. Knowledge is power in a situation like this. And I'd like to arrange additional security for your house until we resolve this situation with Blake," Frank added. "He's escalated to kidnapping attempts, and he might try other tactics if he gets desperate." Mrs. Washington looked at these two men who were offering to help her family without asking for anything in return. "Why are you both willing to do so much for people you barely know?" "Because your granddaughter is a remarkable woman," Nicholas said, looking at Simone with obvious affection. "And because stopping Blake will protect other families from going through what you're experiencing." "And because it's the right thing to do," Frank added simply. Mrs. Washington studied Nicholas's face carefully, using the intuition that had guided her through 7 decades of life. "Young man, are you in love with my granddaughter?" Simone felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Grandma." "It's okay," Nicholas said, looking directly at Mrs. Washington. "Yes, ma'am, I am. I know it's happened quickly, but some things in life are too important to overthink. And Simone? How do you feel about him? Simone looked at Nicholas, who was watching her with patient hope in his eyes. Despite the complicated circumstances and the short time they had known each other, she knew her answer was truthful. I'm falling in love with him too, she said softly. Mrs. Washington nodded approvingly. Good. It's about time you found someone worthy of you. And Nicholas, you have my permission to court my granddaughter properly once we get this Blake situation resolved. Thank you, ma'am, Nicholas said with a smile. I promise to take good care of both of you. As they prepared to leave with copies of the mineral rights documents, Mrs. Washington pulled Simone aside for a private conversation. That man loves you, she said simply. I can see it in the way he looks at you and listens to you. Don't let fear keep you from accepting the happiness you deserve. I'm scared, Grandma, Simone admitted. Everything is happening so fast and his world is so different from ours. Love isn't about having the same background or the same bank account, Mrs. Washington said wisely. It's about having the same values and caring about each other's happiness. That man has shown you kindness, respect, and protection when you needed it most. Those are the qualities that matter. What if this is all just gratitude and proximity? What if my feelings aren't real? Sweetheart, you've always been too smart for your own good, Mrs. Washington said with a gentle laugh. Your heart knows the difference between gratitude and love. Trust it. On the drive back to Nicholas's penthouse, Simone reflected on her grandmother's words and the day's revelations. The mineral rights discovery had given them powerful leverage against Blake, but it had also raised the stakes significantly. If the underground resources were as valuable as Frank suspected, Blake might become even more desperate and dangerous. What happens next? She asked Nicholas as they sat in traffic. Frank will arrange for geological surveys to determine what's actually underground, Nicholas replied. I'll have my lawyers research the legal implications of the mineral rights. And we'll use this information to turn the tables on Blake. How do we do that? Instead of waiting for him to make another move against your family, we're going to expose his entire operation, Nicholas said with determination. We'll gather enough evidence to have him arrested and to protect all the families he's targeted. And then? Nicholas reached over and took her hand. Then we figure out what we want our future to look like together. Simone squeezed his hand, feeling a combination of love, hope, and nervous excitement about what lay ahead. The past few days had shown her that life could change dramatically and unexpectedly, bringing both danger and opportunity in equal measure. But with Nicholas beside her and her grandmother's blessing, she felt ready to face whatever challenges Blake might present and whatever possibilities the future might hold. The geological survey results came back faster than anyone expected, and they exceeded all predictions about the value of Mrs. Washington's mineral rights. Frank delivered the news to Nicholas and Simone over breakfast on a sunny Tuesday morning, spreading maps and technical reports across the dining table in the penthouse. The underground deposits are extensive, Frank explained, pointing to colored areas on the geological maps. Rare earth elements in concentrations that could be worth upwards of $50 million. Simone nearly choked on her coffee. $50 million? That's a conservative estimate based on current market prices, Frank confirmed. And that explains why Blake has been so aggressive about acquiring properties in this area. He must have gotten advance information about these deposits somehow. Nicholas studied the maps thoughtfully. This gives us significant leverage, but it also makes the situation more dangerous. Blake has probably invested too much money in this project to walk away now. What do you mean? Simone asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. He's going to escalate, Frank said grimly. $50 million is enough motivation for desperate measures. Then we need to move faster than he does, Nicholas said decisively. Frank, I want you to arrange a meeting with the district attorney's office. With this evidence and the testimony from Blake's former employee, we should have enough for criminal charges. Already scheduled for this afternoon, Frank replied. I've also arranged for additional security around both you and Mrs. Washington. Blake's people have been quiet for the past 2 days, which probably means they're planning something. After Frank left to coordinate with law enforcement, Nicholas and Simone found themselves alone in the penthouse for the first time in several days. The constant activity of the investigation had kept them busy, but it had also prevented them from addressing the growing feelings between them. How are you handling all this? Nicholas asked as they moved to the living room. Simone was wearing a bright red dress that she had found in the guest closet, and Nicholas thought she looked beautiful despite the stress of recent events. I'm still trying to process that my grandmother is sitting on a $50 million fortune, Simone said, settling onto the sofa beside him. A week ago, the most valuable thing in our family was her recipe for pound cake. Nicholas laughed, enjoying her ability to find humor in the situation. What will you do with the money if you decide to sell the mineral rights? I have no idea, Simone admitted. Grandma and I talked about it yesterday, and neither of us has ever thought about having that kind of wealth. She wants to make sure some of it goes to help other families who have been hurt by people like Blake. That sounds like both of you, Nicholas said warmly. Always thinking about how to help others. What about you? Simone asked. You've spent the past week helping people you barely knew, using your own resources to fight someone else's battle. Don't you ever think about the cost to yourself? The only cost that matters to me is the possibility of losing you, Nicholas said simply. Everything else is just money and time. Simone felt her heart skip at his words. Over the past week, she had watched Nicholas handle every aspect of their crisis with calm competence and generous concern. He had opened his home, hired security, arranged legal help, and coordinated investigations without ever making her feel like a burden or an obligation. Nicholas, she began, but he gently interrupted her. I know what you're going to say, he said. You're going to tell me that we haven't known each other long enough, or that the circumstances make everything complicated, or that you're not sure if your feelings are real. Those are all valid concerns, Simone said softly. They are, Nicholas agreed. But they're also fears talking, not truth. The truth is that I've learned more about your character in 1 week than I learned about some people in years of knowing them. The truth is that you're brave, kind, intelligent, and loyal. The truth is that I want to spend the rest of my life getting to know you better. The rest of your life? Simone asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I love you, Simone, Nicholas said, taking her hands in his. I love your dedication to your family, your concern for others, your strength in the face of danger. I love the way you think about problems and the way you care about justice. I love your intelligence and your beauty and your compassion. Simone looked into his eyes and saw complete sincerity there. She had been fighting her own feelings because the situation seemed too dramatic, too much like a romance novel to be real. But the man in front of her was very real, and so were the emotions she felt when she looked at him. I love you too, she said, finally allowing herself to speak the truth. I've been scared to admit it because everything happened so fast, but I know my heart. I love your kindness and your strength. I love the way you treat my grandmother with respect and the way you've protected both of us without asking for anything in return. Nicholas moved closer to her on the sofa, and this time there were no interruptions when he leaned in to kiss her. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as they both acknowledged the feelings they had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, Simone felt like her whole world had shifted. The danger from Blake was still real, the investigation was still ongoing, and the future was still uncertain. But she was no longer facing any of it alone. What happens after we deal with Blake? She asked, staying close enough to feel the warmth of Nicholas's presence. Whatever you want to happen, Nicholas replied. We can take things as slowly or as quickly as feels right to you. The important thing is that we're together. I want to contribute, Simone said. If Grandma and I do have access to this kind of wealth, I want to use it to help other people. Maybe we could work together on projects that make a difference. I'd love that, Nicholas said with enthusiasm. I've been looking for a partner who shares my values about using resources responsibly. A business partner? Simone asked with a smile. Among other things, Nicholas replied, kissing her forehead gently. They spent the rest of the morning talking about possibilities for the future, sharing stories about their childhoods and their dreams, and simply enjoying the luxury of being together without the constant pressure of crisis management. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything in your life changed for the better in just a few days? Love stories like Simone and Nicholas's remind us that sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them. Subscribe to see how their love story unfolds and let us know in the comments about your own experiences with unexpected romance. Around noon, Frank called to report that the district attorney was very interested in their evidence against Blake and wanted to move forward with criminal charges. The meeting that afternoon would be crucial in determining how quickly they could neutralize the threat Blake posed. Are you ready for this? Nicholas asked as they prepared to leave for the meeting. I'm ready, Simone said, wearing the bright red dress and feeling more confident than she had since this whole situation began. We have the evidence, we have the legal support, and we have each other. We do, Nicholas agreed, taking her hand as they walked to the elevator. And after today we can start planning our future without looking over our shoulders. The district attorney's office was located in a downtown building that bustled with legal activity. Frank met them in the lobby, and together they took the elevator to the prosecutor's floor. Simone felt nervous about testifying against Blake, but she was also determined to see justice done for her family and for all the other victims. District Attorney Patricia Collins was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an air of competence that immediately put Simone at ease. She reviewed their evidence carefully, asked detailed questions about the kidnapping attempt and Blake's harassment campaign, and seemed particularly interested in the financial records Frank had obtained. "This is exactly the kind of case we've been hoping to build against Blake," Collins said after reviewing everything. "We've suspected his tactics for years, but we haven't had victims willing to testify or evidence solid enough to guarantee convictions." "What happens next?" Nicholas asked. "We'll need Miss Washington to give a formal statement about the kidnapping attempt," Collins replied. "And we'll need Mrs. Washington to testify about the harassment campaign. With the financial evidence and testimony from Blake's former employee, we should have enough for arrests and convictions." "How long will the legal process take?" Simone asked. "If Blake pleads guilty to avoid trial, it could be resolved in a few months," Collins said. "If he fights the charges, it could take a year or more. But either way, we can get restraining orders in place immediately to protect your family." As they left the district attorney's office, Simone felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time since this ordeal began, she could see a clear path to resolution and safety. "I think we should celebrate," Nicholas said as they walked back to his car. "This is the beginning of the end for Blake." "What did you have in mind?" Simone asked. "Dinner at the best restaurant in the city," Nicholas replied. "And then maybe we can start making plans for what comes after all this is over." That evening, as they sat in an elegant restaurant overlooking the city lights, Simone reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. A week ago, she had been a quiet librarian with modest dreams and simple pleasures. Now she was in love with an amazing man. Her family was about to become wealthy beyond their imaginations, and she was part of a legal case that would bring justice to numerous victims of corruption. "Are you happy?" Nicholas asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "I'm happier than I ever thought possible," Simone replied truthfully. "And I'm grateful that terrible circumstances brought us together." "I prefer to think that fate brought us together," Nicholas said, raising his wine glass in a toast. "To unexpected love and new beginnings." "To unexpected love and new beginnings," Simone agreed, touching her glass to his. As they toasted their future together, neither of them noticed the man at the bar who had been watching them throughout dinner, or the phone call he made as they prepared to leave the restaurant. Blake's desperation was about to reach dangerous new levels. The next morning brought alarming news that shattered the peaceful mood of the previous evening. Frank arrived at Nicholas's penthouse before dawn with an urgent expression and disturbing information about Blake's activities. "Blake knows about the district attorney's investigation," Frank announced without preamble. "And he's planning something desperate." Nicholas and Simone were still in their robes, having been awakened by Frank's early arrival. The seriousness in his voice immediately dispelled any lingering sleepiness. "How do you know?" Nicholas asked, leading Frank to the kitchen where they could talk over coffee. "My contact in Blake's organization called me an hour ago," Frank explained. "Blake held an emergency meeting last night with his closest associates. He knows we have his financial records and testimony from his former employee." "How could he know that?" Simone asked, wrapping her bright blue robe more tightly around herself. "Someone in the district attorney's office probably tipped him off," Frank said grimly. "Blake has been operating for years without consequences, which suggests he has connections in law enforcement or city government." Nicholas felt a surge of anger at the thought that corruption might extend into the very offices meant to pursue justice. "What is Blake planning to do?" "According to my source, he's moving up his timeline significantly," Frank said. "Instead of waiting for the legal process to play out, he's planning to force your grandmother to sign over the mineral rights immediately." "How can he force her to do that?" Simone asked, though she dreaded the answer. "By threatening you," Frank replied. "His plan is to take you hostage and use you as leverage to make Mrs. Washington cooperate." Simone felt a chill run through her body. The kidnapping attempt from a week ago had been terrifying enough when she thought it was random criminal activity. The idea that Blake was planning a more organized and desperate attempt was horrifying. "When is this supposed to happen?" Nicholas asked, already reaching for his phone to call additional security. "Soon. Possibly today," Frank said. "Blake is running out of time and options. He's invested too much money in this project to walk away, and he knows that if the criminal charges stick, he'll lose everything. Then we need to get both Simone and her grandmother to safety immediately, Nicholas said decisively. I've already arranged for Mrs. Washington to be moved to a secure location, Frank confirmed. My team picked her up an hour ago, and she's being taken to a safe house outside the city. What about me? Simone asked. If Blake's people are planning to grab me, staying here might not be safe either. You're right, Nicholas said, his mind already working through options. Blake knows where I live, and he probably has enough resources to get past building security if he's desperate enough. Frank nodded agreement. I recommend we move you both to a location that Blake doesn't know about. I have a cabin about 2 hours north of the city that's completely off the grid. How long would we need to stay hidden? Simone asked. Not long, Frank assured her. With Blake planning criminal activity, the district attorney can move much faster on arrests. If we can keep you safe for 24 to 48 hours, law enforcement should be able to apprehend Blake and his associates. Nicholas was already moving toward the bedroom to pack. How quickly do we need to leave? As soon as possible, Frank said. My source thinks Blake's people might try to grab Simone when she leaves the building. Within an hour, they were driving north on a highway that led away from the city toward rural areas where Blake would have difficulty tracking them. Nicholas drove while Frank coordinated with law enforcement from the passenger seat, and Simone sat in the back reviewing legal documents on her phone. The cabin turned out to be a comfortable retreat nestled in a wooded area beside a small lake. It had modern amenities despite its remote location, and Frank's security preparations included satellite internet and encrypted communication equipment. This is beautiful, Simone said as they settled into the main room, which featured large windows overlooking the lake. She was wearing a bright green dress that Nicholas had grabbed from the guest closet in their hurried packing. I use it for fishing and thinking, Frank said with a slight smile. It's one of the few places where I can completely disconnect from work. How long have you known Frank? Simone asked Nicholas as Frank stepped outside to make some phone calls. 5 years, Nicholas replied. He was a police detective who helped me with a security issue at one of my companies. When he decided to leave the force, I hired him immediately. He seems very dedicated to protecting people. He is. Frank left police work because he got frustrated with corruption and politics interfering with justice. Working for me gives him the resources to help people without bureaucratic constraints. Simone walked to the windows and looked out at the peaceful lake, thinking about how different this view was from the urban environment where she had spent her entire life. The circumstances that brought her here were frightening, but the setting itself was calming. Are you scared? Nicholas asked, joining her at the window. Surprisingly, no, Simone said after considering the question. A week ago, I would have been terrified by a situation like this. But now I feel like we're going to win. What changed? You, Simone said simply. Having someone who cares about me and has the resources to fight back makes all the difference. And knowing that we're fighting for justice, not just our own safety, gives me strength. Nicholas put his arms around her from behind, and they stood together looking out at the lake. Despite the danger that had driven them from the city, Simone felt a sense of peace that she hadn't experienced in days. When this is over, Nicholas said softly, I want to bring you back here under better circumstances. I think you'd love it here in the spring when everything is green and blooming. I'd like that, Simone replied, leaning back against his chest. I'd like to see this place when we're not running from criminals. Frank returned from his phone calls with updates from the city. The district attorney's office has moved quickly on arrest warrants, he reported. They should be in custody by this evening. That seems almost too easy, Nicholas said skeptically. It's not easy, Frank corrected. It's the result of good police work and Blake's desperation making him careless. When criminals get panicked, they make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Blake's been making calls from his office phone discussing the kidnapping plan, Frank explained. He apparently forgot that his business lines might be monitored as part of the investigation. Simone shook her head in amazement. He's been careful enough to avoid prosecution for years, and now he's discussing kidnapping on recorded phone lines? Desperation makes people stupid, Frank said. Blake knows he's running out of time, and panic is overriding his usual caution. They spent the afternoon monitoring news from the city and staying in contact with law enforcement. Nicholas cooked lunch while Simone read by the fireplace, and Frank maintained his security watch from the cabin's deck. Around 4 in the afternoon, Frank received the call they had been waiting for. Blake and 3 of his associates have been arrested, he announced with satisfaction. The district attorney's office executed the warrant simultaneously at multiple locations. Is it over? Simone asked, hardly daring to hope. The immediate threat is over, Frank confirmed. Blake is in custody, and the evidence against him is overwhelming. He won't be getting bail on kidnapping and extortion charges. Nicholas felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the past week he had been focused on protecting Simone and her family, but the constant worry about Blake's next move had been exhausting. What happens now? Simone asked. Now we go home, Nicholas said, pulling her into his arms. And we start planning our future without looking over our shoulders. Your grandmother is safe to return to her house, Frank added. Though I recommend she consider upgrading her security system as a precaution. As they prepared to drive back to the city, Simone reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. A week ago she had been running for her life from unknown kidnappers. Now she was in love with an amazing man, her family had discovered unexpected wealth, and justice was being served to the criminal who had threatened them. Thank you, she said to Frank as they loaded their bags into the car. For everything you've done to protect us. It was my pleasure, Frank replied. And congratulations on the engagement. Engagement? Simone asked in surprise, looking at Nicholas. I haven't asked her yet, Nicholas said with a laugh. Though I'm planning to once we get home and settle back into normal life. Normal life is going to be very different from what either of us is used to, Simone observed. Different but better, Nicholas said confidently. We'll figure it out together. As they drove back toward the city in the early evening light, Simone watched the landscape change from rural forests to suburban developments to urban buildings. She was returning to the same city she had left that morning, but she was a different person than she had been just hours earlier. She was no longer a victim running from threats or a woman uncertain about her feelings. She was someone who had faced danger and emerged stronger, someone who had found love in unexpected circumstances, and someone who was ready to use newfound resources to help others. The future stretched ahead of them full of possibilities, and for the first time since this ordeal began, Simone felt completely confident about what lay ahead. The return to Nicholas's penthouse that evening felt like a homecoming to Simone, even though she had only been living there for a week. The familiar, elegant surroundings and city views from the windows now represented safety and comfort rather than a temporary refuge. I should call my grandmother and let her know we're safe, Simone said as they settled into the living room. She was still wearing the bright green dress from their day at the cabin, and she felt more relaxed than she had since this entire ordeal began. Frank arranged for her to be brought back to her house this afternoon, Nicholas said, handing her his phone. She should be there by now. Simone called her grandmother and spent 20 minutes reassuring her that Blake was in custody and that the immediate danger had passed. Mrs. Washington was characteristically practical about the situation, expressing relief that justice was being served but more interest in when Simone and Nicholas were planning to visit for dinner. She wants to cook for you tomorrow night, Simone told Nicholas after ending the call. She says it's the least she can do to thank you for protecting both of us. I'd be honored, Nicholas replied. I've been hoping to spend more time getting to know her. She likes you, Simone said with a smile. She told me yesterday that you have good character and proper intentions, which is high praise from her. What does she think about us moving so quickly? She thinks that when you know something is right, waiting doesn't make it more right, Simone said, settling onto the sofa beside him. She also pointed out that she and my grandfather got engaged after knowing each other for 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Nicholas asked with surprise. It was 1972 and he was shipping out with the Navy, Simone explained. They wrote letters for 2 years while he was deployed and then got married when he came home. They were together for 45 years until he died. So she understands that sometimes love happens quickly. She understands that love is about recognizing someone whose values match yours and whose happiness becomes important to you, Simone said. Everything else is just details. Nicholas took her hand and looked into her eyes. In that case, I have something to ask you. Before he could continue, his phone rang with Frank's ringtone. Nicholas looked apologetic as he answered the call. What's the update? Nicholas asked, putting the phone on speaker so Simone could hear. Blake has agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence, Frank reported. He's providing information about his entire operation, including other developers who have been using similar tactics. That's good news, Simone said. It means other families will get justice too. There's more, Frank continued. Blake's cooperation includes returning properties he acquired through illegal means. Some of the families who were forced to sell will have the option to buy their properties back at the original sale prices. Including Maria Santos and her family restaurant? Simone asked, thinking about the woman she had interviewed. Including them, Frank confirmed. Blake's entire development project is being unwound, and his assets are being used to compensate victims. After ending the call, Nicholas and Simone sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing the magnitude of what had been accomplished. Not only had they protected themselves and her grandmother, but their investigation had led to justice for numerous other victims of Blake's crimes. "I can't believe it's really over," Simone said finally. "The criminal case is over," Nicholas agreed. "But the best part is just beginning." "What do you mean?" Nicholas stood up and walked to his bedroom, returning a moment later with a small velvet box that he had clearly been hiding since before their trip to the cabin. "I bought this 3 days ago," he said, sitting back down beside her. "I was waiting for the right moment to ask you, but I've realized that with us, every moment has been the right moment." Simone's heart began racing as Nicholas opened the box to reveal a beautiful diamond ring that was elegant without being ostentatious. "Simone Washington," Nicholas said, taking her hand. "I love your intelligence, your kindness, your strength, and your compassion. I love the way you care about your family and the way you stand up for justice. I love your beautiful smile and your generous heart. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Simone said immediately, tears of happiness filling her eyes. "Yes, absolutely yes." Nicholas slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. They kissed deeply, celebrating not just their engagement but everything they had overcome together. "When did you have time to buy a ring?" Simone asked, admiring the way the diamond caught the light. "I called a jeweler on Tuesday morning while you were showering," Nicholas admitted. "I described what I thought you would like and they delivered it that afternoon." "You were that sure I would say yes?" "I was that sure we belonged together," Nicholas said. "Whether you said yes immediately or needed time to think about it, I knew this was right." "I love you," Simone said, still looking at the ring in amazement. "I love your confidence and your generosity and the way you make me feel like anything is possible." "Anything is possible," Nicholas said. "We have the resources to do whatever we want with our lives, and we have each other to figure out what that should be." "I want to help other people," Simone said without hesitation. "I want to use the mineral rights money and your business connections to make a difference for families like mine." "I was hoping you'd say that," Nicholas replied with a smile. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation that provides legal and financial support to people fighting against corruption and exploitation." "Like what Blake was doing to all those families?" "Exactly like that. We could help them fight back instead of just being victims." Simone felt a surge of excitement about the possibilities. "We could also help with education and job training for people in underserved communities, and housing assistance for families who have been displaced by gentrification." "We could do all of that and more," Nicholas agreed. "The mineral rights alone will provide enough funding to make a significant impact." They spent the rest of the evening making plans for their foundation and their future together. Nicholas showed Simone financial projections and explained how charitable foundations operated, while Simone contributed ideas about community needs and effective outreach strategies. "I want your grandmother to be involved," Nicholas said as they discussed board composition for their foundation. "Her wisdom and life experience would be valuable in making decisions about how to help families." "She would love that," Simone said. "She's always been passionate about helping others, but she's never had the resources to do it on a large scale. Now she will." Around midnight, they called Mrs. Washington to share the news of their engagement. Despite the late hour, she was delighted to hear from them and offered enthusiastic congratulations. "When are you planning to have the wedding?" Mrs. Washington asked. "We haven't discussed that yet," Simone replied, looking at Nicholas questioningly. "I'd be happy to get married tomorrow if you want," Nicholas said. "But I suspect you'd like time to plan something special." "I'd like a wedding that includes both our families and friends," Simone said. "But I don't need anything elaborate or expensive. Just something meaningful." "How about a summer wedding?" Mrs. Washington suggested. "June or July with a garden party reception. Nothing too fancy but beautiful and memorable." "That sounds perfect," Simone agreed. After ending the call, Nicholas and Simone sat together on the sofa, planning their wedding and their future. The stress and danger of the past week seemed like a distant memory, replaced by hope and excitement about what lay ahead. "Are you sure you're ready for your life to change completely?" Nicholas asked as they prepared for bed. "My life already changed completely," Simone replied. "The moment you stopped to help me in the street, everything became different." Getting married and starting our foundation together is just the next chapter. No regrets about leaving your quiet library job for all this chaos and excitement? The library will always be there if I want to go back, Simone said. But I think I'm meant for something bigger now. We're meant for something bigger together. As they said goodnight and went to their separate bedrooms for what would be one of the last times, Simone reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. A week ago, she had been a woman with modest dreams and simple pleasures. Now she was engaged to an extraordinary man, her family was financially secure, and she had the opportunity to help make the world a better place. But more than any of the external changes, she was different inside. She had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed, courage she had never needed to access, and a capacity for love that was deeper and more transformative than anything she had experienced before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight she felt nothing but gratitude for the unexpected ways that life could change for the better. 3 weeks after Blake's arrest, just when Simone and Nicholas thought their legal troubles were behind them, Frank arrived at the penthouse with disturbing news that would test their resolve one final time. Blake is trying to get his charges reduced by claiming he was coerced into the kidnapping plot, Frank announced over breakfast. His lawyers are arguing that someone else was the mastermind behind the operation. Simone, who was wearing a cheerful yellow dress that reflected her improved mood over recent weeks, felt her stomach drop. What does that mean for the case? It means Blake's legal team is trying to create doubt about his guilt, Frank explained. They're claiming he was just following orders from a more powerful criminal organization. Nicholas set down his coffee cup with a frustrated expression. Is there any evidence to support his claim? That's the problem, Frank said. Blake has provided some financial records that suggest he was receiving funding from an unknown source. The district attorney's office is concerned that dismissing this information could compromise their case. So what happens now? Simone asked, already dreading the answer. The prosecution wants you to testify at a preliminary hearing, Frank said. Blake's lawyers are demanding the right to cross-examine you about the kidnapping attempt and your grandmother's property. When? Nicholas asked immediately. Next week. Thursday morning. Simone felt a familiar anxiety returning. Just when she had started to feel safe and normal again, the legal system was pulling her back into the spotlight of Blake's criminal case. I'll do it, she said before Nicholas could object. If my testimony helps convict Blake and protects other families, then I'll testify. You don't have to do this, Nicholas said, taking her hand. We could probably get the charges to stick without your testimony. But they would be stronger with it, Simone replied. And I want Blake to face the full consequences of what he did. The hearing will be public, Frank warned. Blake's lawyers will try to discredit you and your family. They might bring up the mineral rights value and suggest that you're motivated by money rather than justice. Let them try, Simone said with determination. Anyone who looks at the facts will see that Blake is the criminal here. Nicholas admired her courage but worried about the stress of public testimony. Over the past 3 weeks, Simone had been adjusting to her new life with characteristic grace and strength. She had started working with Nicholas on plans for their foundation, had been spending time with wedding planners, and had even begun taking business courses to prepare for her new role as a philanthropist. I'll be there with you every step of the way, Nicholas promised, and we'll make sure you have the best legal representation possible. Frank, what do we know about Blake's lawyers? Simone asked. They're expensive and aggressive, Frank replied. The kind of attorneys who specialize in getting wealthy criminals reduced sentences by shifting blame to others. Then we need to be prepared for anything, Nicholas said decisively. The next week passed quickly as Nicholas's legal team prepared Simone for her testimony. They conducted practice sessions where she answered hostile questions and learned to stay calm under pressure. Nicholas sat in on every session, providing moral support and helping her prepare for various scenarios. Remember, Attorney Sarah Chin advised during their final practice session, answer only the questions asked, stick to the facts, and don't let them provoke you into emotional responses. What if they ask about my relationship with Nicholas? Simone asked. Blake's lawyers might try to suggest that I'm making false accusations to help my fiancé's business interests. If they go that direction, we'll object, Chin said. Your personal relationship has nothing to do with Blake's criminal actions. The morning of the hearing, Simone dressed carefully in a professional navy blue suit that projected both confidence and respectability. Nicholas wore a conservative dark gray suit, and they arrived at the courthouse together with Frank and their legal team. The courthouse was busy with reporters and spectators, many of whom recognized the case as a significant prosecution of real estate corruption. Blake's arrest had generated considerable media attention, and his attempt to blame others for his crimes had only increased public interest. "Are you ready for this?" Nicholas asked as they waited outside the courtroom. "I'm ready," Simone replied, though she could feel her heart racing. "I keep thinking about Maria Santos and all the other families Blake hurt. They deserve justice." When they entered the courtroom, Simone saw Blake for the first time since the night he had ordered her kidnapping. He looked smaller and less threatening in his orange jail uniform, but his eyes still held the arrogance that had driven him to believe he could intimidate families into submission. District Attorney Patricia Collins presented the prosecution's case efficiently, laying out evidence of Blake's systematic harassment campaign and the financial records that proved his involvement in criminal activities. When she called Simone to testify, the courtroom fell silent. "Miss Washington," Collins began, "please tell the court about the events of the evening when you were chased by 3 men near the downtown library." Simone took a deep breath and began her testimony, describing in clear detail the kidnapping attempt and her escape. She spoke about the fear she had felt and the way the men had seemed to know her routine and identity. "Did you have any idea why these men might want to kidnap you?" Collins asked. "No," Simone replied. "I was just a librarian living a quiet life with my grandmother. I had never been involved in anything that would attract criminal attention." "When did you learn about the connection between the kidnapping attempt and Harrison Blake?" "During the investigation that followed. We discovered that Blake had been systematically targeting property owners in my grandmother's neighborhood, and that our family's mineral rights were particularly valuable to his development project." When Collins finished her questioning, Blake's defense attorney stood up for cross-examination. He was an older man with silver hair and an expensive suit who immediately began trying to discredit Simone's testimony. "Miss Washington, isn't it true that you are now engaged to a millionaire who stands to benefit financially from Blake's prosecution?" "Objection," Collins said immediately. "Relevance." "I'll allow it," the judge said. "I am engaged to Nicholas Thompson," Simone replied calmly. "But my testimony about Blake's crimes has nothing to do with my personal relationships. Isn't it convenient that this alleged kidnapping attempt led to you meeting a wealthy man who has now offered to make you rich?" "The kidnapping attempt was real and terrifying," Simone said firmly. "And Nicholas stopped to help me because he's a good person, not because he had any knowledge of my family's property value. But you do stand to gain millions of dollars from the mineral rights on your grandmother's property, correct?" "My family has legal ownership of those mineral rights," Simone replied. "Blake's attempt to steal them through intimidation and violence doesn't change that fact." The defense attorney continued his aggressive questioning for another 30 minutes, trying to suggest that Simone had fabricated or exaggerated the kidnapping attempt for financial gain. But Simone remained calm and consistent in her answers, sticking to the facts and refusing to be provoked. When the cross-examination ended, Collins presented additional evidence including recorded phone calls where Blake discussed the kidnapping plan and financial records showing payments to the men who had chased Simone. "The evidence clearly shows that Harrison Blake orchestrated a campaign of intimidation and violence against the Washington family," Collins argued in her closing statement. "Miss Washington's testimony is consistent with physical evidence and corroborated by multiple witnesses." Blake's attorney made a final attempt to suggest that his client was being framed by unnamed co-conspirators, but the judge seemed unimpressed by arguments that lacked supporting evidence. After deliberating for less than 2 hours, the judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed with all charges against Blake, including kidnapping, extortion, and conspiracy. Blake's attempt to reduce his charges by blaming others had failed completely. "Mr. Blake," the judge said as court concluded, "your systematic campaign against innocent families represents a serious abuse of power and resources. This court finds the evidence of your guilt overwhelming." As they left the courthouse, Simone felt a profound sense of relief and vindication. Her testimony had been challenging, but she had spoken the truth clearly and helped ensure that Blake would face full consequences for his crimes. "You were incredible in there," Nicholas said as they walked to their car. "Blake's lawyer threw everything he could at you and you handled it perfectly." "I kept thinking about all the families he hurt," Simone replied. "That made it easy to stay focused on the truth." Frank caught up with them as they reached the parking garage. "Collins thinks Blake will plead guilty rather than face trial after today's hearing. His legal strategy completely backfired." "What kind of sentence is he looking at?" Nicholas asked. "Probably 15 to 20 years, Frank said. And he'll have to pay restitution to all his victims." As they drove home through the city, Simone watched the familiar streets pass by and reflected on how much her life had changed since the night she had run down these same streets in fear. That terrified young woman seemed like a different person now. She had found love, discovered inner strength she hadn't known she possessed, and helped bring justice to a criminal who had hurt numerous families. Most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the worst experiences in life can lead to the most extraordinary opportunities. "What are you thinking about?" Nicholas asked as they pulled into the garage of his building. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am for everything that's happened," Simone said. "Even the scary parts because they led us to each other." "No regrets about any of it?" "None," Simone said with certainty. "Well, maybe one small regret." "What's that?" "I regret that it took a kidnapping attempt for us to meet," Simone said with a smile. "But I suppose every love story has to start somewhere." As they rode the elevator up to the penthouse that had become their home, Simone felt ready to close this chapter of crisis and conflict and begin the next chapter of building something beautiful together. 6 months later, on a perfect June morning, Simone Washington stood in her grandmother's garden preparing for the wedding day she had dreamed about since childhood. The modest backyard had been transformed into an elegant outdoor ceremony space, with white chairs arranged among the rose bushes and string lights creating a magical atmosphere. "You look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart," Mrs. Washington said, adjusting the simple veil that complemented Simone's elegant ivory dress. The dress was neither too elaborate nor too plain, perfectly reflecting Simone's taste for classic simplicity. "I can't believe this day is finally here," Simone said, looking at herself in the mirror they had set up in her grandmother's bedroom. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a dream." "It's not a dream," Mrs. Washington said with a warm smile. "It's the life you deserve, and you've earned every bit of happiness coming your way." Through the window, Simone could see guests arriving and being seated in the garden. Nicholas's family had traveled from various parts of the country, and many of Simone's colleagues from the library were there along with neighbors and friends. The guest list was modest but filled with people who genuinely cared about the couple's happiness. Frank Rodriguez appeared in the doorway wearing a formal suit and carrying his role as Nicholas's best man with obvious pride. "Ladies, it's almost time. Nicholas is getting nervous, which I'm told is normal for grooms." "Is he really nervous?" Simone asked with concern. "He's excited nervous, not worried nervous," Frank clarified. "He keeps checking his watch and asking if it's time to start yet." "That sounds like him," Simone said with affection. Over the past 6 months, she had learned that Nicholas approached everything important in his life with enthusiasm and barely contained energy. The ceremony itself was everything Simone had hoped for: personal, meaningful, and filled with joy. Nicholas waited at the altar under an arch of white roses, wearing a charcoal gray suit that made him look handsome and distinguished. When Simone walked down the aisle with her grandmother, his face lit up with such obvious happiness that several guests dabbed at their eyes with tissues. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, "we are gathered here today to celebrate the marriage of Simone and Nicholas, two people who found each other in unexpected circumstances and discovered that love can transform any situation." The ceremony included traditional vows as well as personal promises they had written for each other. Nicholas spoke about his commitment to supporting Simone's dreams and working together to help others. Simone promised to love him through all of life's adventures and to build a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nicholas kissed Simone with such genuine emotion that the entire gathering burst into spontaneous applause. As they walked back down the aisle together, Simone felt like she was floating with happiness. The reception took place in the same garden, with tables set up under the string lights and a small dance floor created on the patio. Nicholas had hired a jazz quartet that played music, ranging from classic standards to contemporary love songs, creating an atmosphere that was both elegant and relaxed. "I have something to tell you," Mrs. Washington announced as she and Simone sat together watching Nicholas dance with his mother. "I've decided what to do with part of the mineral rights money." "What's that, Grandma?" "I'm going to establish a scholarship fund for young people from our neighborhood who want to go to college but can't afford it," Mrs. Washington said. "It will be called the Eleanor and Simone Washington Educational Foundation." "Grandma, that's wonderful," Simone said, hugging her tightly. "But you don't need to include my name." "Yes, I do. This whole situation started because someone tried to hurt you, and it led to good things for many people. Your name belongs on something that will help others." As the evening progressed, Simone found herself moving through the reception like she was in a beautiful dream. She danced with Nicholas, chatted with guests, and accepted countless congratulations on her marriage and her new role as a philanthropist. Mrs. Thompson, Nicholas said, taking her hand as the reception was winding down. How does that sound? It sounds perfect, Simone replied. Though I think it will take me a while to get used to it. You have the rest of our lives to practice. Frank approached them with an update he had been waiting all day to share. I have wedding gift news for you both. Blake was sentenced this morning to 18 years in prison, and the restitution payments have been finalized. All the families will get their money back? Simone asked. All of them, plus compensation for their suffering, Frank confirmed. Maria Santos and her family are reopening their restaurant next month. That's the best wedding gift we could have received, Nicholas said, squeezing Simone's hand. As the last guest departed and the cleanup crew began removing tables and chairs, Simone and Nicholas stood together in the garden where they had just become husband and wife. So what happens now? Simone asked, leaning against Nicholas's chest as they swayed to music only they could hear. Now we go on our honeymoon to Italy, Nicholas said. Then we come home and start the foundation that's going to help hundreds of families. And after that? After that, we spend the rest of our lives making each other happy and making the world a little bit better, Nicholas said. We'll have children who will grow up knowing that their parents fell in love while fighting for justice. Children? Simone asked with a smile. I'm hoping for several, Nicholas admitted. I want to fill a house with little people who have your intelligence and compassion. And your determination and generosity, Simone added. Deal, Nicholas said, kissing her forehead gently. As they prepared to leave for their wedding night at a luxury hotel downtown, Simone took one last look around the garden where she had grown up playing among her grandmother's flowers. This small backyard had hosted family barbecues, birthday parties, and now her wedding reception. Tomorrow it would go back to being a quiet place where her grandmother tended her roses and enjoyed her morning coffee. But tonight it had been the setting for the beginning of a new chapter in Simone's life, one that would take her far from these familiar surroundings but would always be rooted in the values and love she had learned here. Ready to start our new life together? Nicholas asked as Frank held the car door open for them. I've been ready since the night you stopped to help me, Simone replied. Everything since then has just been details. As they drove through the city toward their hotel, Simone reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she had been a quiet librarian with modest dreams and simple pleasures. Tonight she was Mrs. Nicholas Thompson, co-founder of a charitable foundation, and a woman who had discovered that her capacity for love and courage was far greater than she had ever imagined. The future stretched ahead of them filled with possibilities, travels to new places, children to raise, families to help through their foundation, and countless quiet moments together building a life based on love and shared purpose. I love you, Mrs. Thompson, Nicholas said as they pulled up to the hotel. I love you too, Mr. Thompson, Simone replied. And I can't wait to see what adventures we'll have together. As they walked into the hotel lobby hand in hand, both of them knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. They had found each other in the darkness of danger and fear, but they would build their future together in the light of hope, love, and endless possibility. The kidnapping attempt that had terrified Simone just months earlier now seemed like a blessing in disguise, the unexpected event that had brought her exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of a man who loved her completely and ready to use their combined resources to help others find their own happy endings. Some love stories begin with chance meetings in coffee shops or introductions by mutual friends. Theirs had begun with a desperate run through dark streets and a stranger brave enough to stop and help. But regardless of how it started, what mattered was where it had led them. To a love strong enough to overcome any obstacle and a partnership powerful enough to change the world around them. And as they began their honeymoon and their new life together, both Simone and Nicholas knew that the best chapters of their story were yet to be written.